There's something massive in the fog! It's spreading! Get back!
We're losing containment! Mayday! We need immediate assistance! Hold on to something!
A wave is coming!
One knew that long before the iceberg ever touched the ship, the real danger was already on board, hidden in choices, pressure, pride, and tiny overlooked decisions that would turn a beautiful voyage into the greatest maritime tragedy in history. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic stood at the port of Southampton like a floating city of steel and luxury. Thousands gathered to see it depart, cheering, waving hats, wiping tears. The weather was calm, the sky clear, and the excitement unmatched. Inside the ship, wealthy passengers admired the chandeliers, the grand staircase, the polished wood floors. Others dreamed quietly about a new life in America. No one imagined that this would be their final journey. The Titanic had taken almost 3 years to build, involving thousands of workers and some of the best ship designers of the time. Newspapers proudly called it Unsinkable. Its first trip to New York was marketed as something the world had never seen before, an experience of power, wealth, and safety. Tickets sold out almost immediately. First-class cabins cost more than many homes. It was a masterpiece, at least on the surface. When the ship left the harbor at noon, the captain was under silent pressure. The owners wanted the Titanic to reach New York quickly, faster than expected, so the ship's reputation would spread across the world. To impress the press and wealthy passengers, the Titanic moved at high speed from the moment it left England. The ocean was calm, so the crew felt confident. But calm water can be deceptive, especially when icy dangers float quietly just below the horizon. 3 days into the voyage, the temperature dropped sharply. The night grew darker, the fog thicker. Other ships traveling ahead began noticing dangerous ice drifting in the water. They sent warning after warning to the Titanic. One message described a large field of ice directly in its path. Another warned of massive floating icebergs. But inside the Titanic's wireless room, the operators were overwhelmed with personal messages from first-class travelers who wanted to connect with friends on land. To them, the ice warnings felt like a distraction. Many of the messages were never delivered to the captain. Still, hope remained, because Titanic had 2 lookouts stationed high above the deck. Their job was to spot ice early, but an unbelievable problem was hiding in their post. They didn't have binoculars. A small key had been misplaced right before departure, locking the binoculars away in a cabinet. Without them, the lookouts could only rely on their eyes, staring into a cold, moonless night where everything looked the same. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, one lookout finally spotted a massive shadow ahead, a dark, towering shape emerging from the fog, an iceberg, directly in Titanic's path. He rang the warning bell and shouted down to the bridge. The crew reacted instantly, trying to turn the ship away. The Titanic barely avoided a full head-on collision, but the side of the ship scraped along the iceberg for nearly 300 feet. To the passengers, the impact felt like a soft vibration. Some barely noticed anything at all. But deep within the ship, the steel hull had opened in several places. Water rushed in fast. Titanic could survive if 1 or 2 of its lower compartments flooded, maybe even 3. But the flooding spread farther than the builders had ever expected. The ship had minutes to make a decision, and hours before, the ocean would take its final breath away. Word spread slowly among passengers. A few stepped outside to see what had happened. confused by the cold air and the quiet deck. The crew tried to stay calm, but the truth was growing clearer by the second. The Titanic was sinking. The captain ordered the lifeboats uncovered. The wireless operators sent out a distress call. The giant ship that had been advertised as Unsinkable was now fighting for time. And while the crew tried to control the situation, one more shocking discovery waited above deck, one that would make the tragedy far worse than anyone could have imagined. As the icy water climbed higher and the truth finally reached the passengers, the darkest reality emerged. There were not enough lifeboats. Chaos was spreading, and the freezing Atlantic was waiting for anyone left behind. What happened next became one of the most heartbreaking scenes in history. Chaos spread through the Titanic like wildfire. Passengers who had been laughing in warm dining rooms minutes earlier were now stepping onto a freezing deck. Confused and terrified, many still didn't believe the ship was in danger. How could something advertised as unsinkable sink on its very first voyage? That disbelief cost precious time. Time the Titanic did not have. As officers opened the wooden covers of the lifeboats, the crew made a devastating discovery. There weren't enough boats for everyone. The ship carried more than 2,200 passengers, but the lifeboats could hold barely half. The design had originally allowed space for 32 lifeboats, but to make the decks look clean and beautiful, the ship sailed with only 20. A decision made for style, not safety. The order was given: women and children first. At first, people hesitated. The deck was still perfectly level. The ship didn't feel like it was sinking. Many thought they were safer staying on board than stepping into a small wooden boat lowered into a freezing ocean at midnight. Some lifeboats left half empty because passengers simply wouldn't get in. Others were lowered quickly out of fear, carrying 20 or 30 people, despite having space for more than 60. Below deck, families in second and third class tried desperately to reach the lifeboats. Many didn't understand English. Many didn't know the ship's layout, and many found locked gates blocking their way. Gates meant to separate classes. By the time they reached the top, most lifeboats were already gone. Inside the ship, water poured through the lower hallways, swallowing carpets, furniture, and luggage. The front of the ship sank deeper, forcing the rear to rise into the dark sky. The elegant grand staircase, once the pride of the Titanic, was now tilting at a terrifying angle. People slid down hallways, grabbing railings to keep balance. The music from the ship's band still echoed across the deck. They continued playing to keep passengers calm. They knew they were not getting on a lifeboat. They played anyway. At 1:30 a.m., the Titanic's bow was nearly underwater. The back of the ship rose higher, and passengers clung to railings, trying to stay on deck as long as possible. The screams grew louder. Officers loaded the last boats. Mothers cried as they were separated from husbands. Children were lifted into boats by strangers. Some families refused to leave each other and stayed on board together. Inside the radio room, the wireless operators tapped out a final message. "We are sinking fast. Please hurry." Rescue ships heard it, but they were hours away. By 2 a.m., only a handful of lifeboats remained. People began jumping into the ocean, hoping to swim to safety. But the water was beyond freezing. The temperature was around -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyone who fell in survived only minutes before their body shut down. The Titanic groaned like a wounded animal as the weight of the water pulled it deeper. Dishes fell from shelves. Glass windows shattered. The stern lifted nearly straight up. Passengers clung to anything they could find. Railings, ropes, even each other. At 2:18 a.m., the ship's lights flickered violently and went out, leaving the ocean in complete blackness. A second later, a deep, thunderous crack split the night. The Titanic broke into two massive pieces. The front half plunged into the deep instantly. The rear section floated a moment longer, then slowly rose upright like a giant tower before sliding beneath the surface. And then silence, just the sound of the freezing wind and faint cries from those struggling in the ice-cold water. More than 1,500 people died that night, most of them within minutes from the brutal cold. Only 705 survived, pulled from the lifeboats by the rescue ship Carpathia hours later. The unsinkable ship now lay shattered at the bottom of the Atlantic, its grand dreams buried under 12,000 feet of water. The tragedy shocked the world and changed maritime safety forever. Ships were now required to carry enough lifeboats for every passenger. Ice patrols were created to warn ships about dangerous waters. Wireless rooms were ordered to stay open 24 hours a day. Hard lessons learned, but learned too late. The Titanic's wreck would remain hidden for more than 70 years until explorers finally found it resting silently in the dark, its broken pieces still telling a story of pride, pressure, and tiny overlooked decisions that led to one of the greatest disasters in history. If even one small decision had been different, one warning delivered, one key found, a few more lifeboats added, would the Titanic still be sailing today in museums instead of lying in pieces at the bottom of the Atlantic?